talking about the economic growth of the United States during the 1950s. This is definitely a decade where the United States is at the pinnacle of its power. And one of the big changes that allows for some of that job growth, that economic growth, are changes in educational opportunities. One of the biggest things was the GI Bill. GI was a just initials that stood for general issue or government issue, and they used that to refer to generic soldiers in World War II. And so that's why you get the iteration of the term GI Joe, a regular guy, regular Joe. But the GI Bill was a law passed by Congress that where the government provided money for school for higher education for returning veterans. So if you served in the Korean War or World War II, you'd be eligible for educational opportunities to get that paid for. And one of the greatest obstacles to higher ed in the past was not that people weren't intelligent enough, but they simply lacked the money. You also see the GI Bill providing low interest loans for people to build homes. And in the United States in particular, purchasing a home is one of the ways that you build wealth. It's one of the few ways or one of the few investments that's almost guaranteed to go up over time. Other things tend to depreciate, houses tend to appreciate. So GIs have the opportunity, a returning veteran had the opportunity to go to school for free, and they essentially were able to educate themselves, not only produce better ways of living, but able to create job opportunities for themselves. Here is another example, like the loans that we were talking about, so that people could buy a home and set down roots. The fact that so many people are able to buy a home now changes the home construction business, which helps out a number of people. If you get a chance, you can Google Levitt Towns. A guy by the last name of Levitt started building these almost prefabricated homes, and they got so good at it that they were able to put these up in virtually no time. Entire towns sprung up out of nowhere. Now, not only did returning veterans get opportunities for education, but student loans started becoming available to young people so that they could go to college. The idea was to get these people who were bright individuals into college so that they could learn more, grow in terms of what their skill set is, and then be able to produce for the economy. So you've got educational opportunities becoming a real thing. You also see an increase in the number of women going to college in the 1950s. Women during World War II had been such an important part of the war effort, and now they're going to assert themselves in the 1950s and 60s in ways that they never had in the past. Now, American pop culture has always been a thing in the 20th century, but maybe it really explodes in the 1950s. And entertainment is where the United States is unquestionably a worldwide leader. The advent of the television becomes a focal point for the American family. Uh, Televisions, they're obviously an entertainment tool, but we use them for a variety of different things. It's not only there for entertainment, but it's there for education. A lot of different shows are educational in nature. Then you throw in it's a news outlet. People can get the news more readily than they ever could in the past. Not only do they get access to the news at a quicker pace, but these individuals are also able to see other things that they would otherwise never get to see. Sporting events, live sporting events becomes a thing. It also changes the advertising industry. People market several things on the television, and it's a big change in society because in the past you were either reading or listening to the radio, but TV provides us with something for our eyes to look at. And there are a lot of positive trends, but people looked at entertainment later on and said this is definitely not something that is a positive thing for society. And we could go on for hours and hours about that, but TV becomes like a family focal point. You would take your TV and you see the console in the picture here, and people would sit around the TV while they eat dinner. TV dinners legitimately became a thing. Now, while television is such an important part of American culture at this time, you also get a big change in music, and that is the invention of what we call rock and roll music. You see here what many people would not know as really the inventor of rock and roll. This is Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry invents a sound that is upbeat, fast paced, The lyrics sometimes are edgy or suggestive, and people like the vibe. It's no longer acoustic. Like I said, it's electric and it's upbeat. They like the loud sound, especially young people. Chuck Berry is the inventor of rock and roll, but undoubtedly Elvis Presley becomes the king of rock and roll. He pushes the boundaries about what's acceptable behavior. Adults can't stand it because not only is he singing things that are a little edgy for the time, but he's also shaking his hips in a provocative way, and adults had a difficult time accepting that. There are a number of other musicians, bands, and artists that make rock and roll what it is, but these two really set people moving forward in terms of a different type of music. Elvis is really the guy that people focus on, though, because he's white. Chuck Berry, being a black man at the time, his influence is muted a little bit because Americans, or at least the establishment culture, couldn't stomach the idea that teenagers were basically obsessing after the music created by black genre. But it's another example of how black Americans have contributed to the music scene. We had jazz in the 1920s, rock and roll in the 1950s, and later on things like R&B. You're going to get rap music and hip hop in the late 70s and 80s and 90s. And so this music is going to be something that young people latch on to. They've got more leisure time now. They got more money to spend. This is something that really resonates. So entertainment's going to be huge as well. So you got television, you've got music trends. You also have books. And there are several books that are going to change people. You don't have to memorize all these books, but I want to lay out a few of them for you to let you know what people are reading at the time. One of the most popular novels of the era, and still popular today, The Catcher in the Rye. And this is something that teenagers, every generation, can resonate with, I think, because it's about a young teenager who finds out that the world, the real world, is not quite what he thought it was. J.D. Salinger's novel has a young person questioning authority, has him doing things that people at the time would have found seriously objectionable. The language uses curse words and things that we would still find profane, but by today's standards, it's really not that bad. But for the time period, adults had a hard time accepting it. They didn't want that book utilized. They didn't want their children reading it because they thought it might get them to do things that were not very wholesome or moral. You also get Fahrenheit 451, a dystopian future novel that you guys have probably read at some point in your high school career, where instead of reading books, people burn them. And they're trying to, society's essentially being dumbed down in a capacity. It's really strange how Ray Bradbury's futuristic outlook actually predicts a lot of weird things that happen. Another popular book, On the Beach, this connecting to people's fears about nuclear holocaust. It's literally about the end of the world, and spoiler alert, everyone dies, literally. You also get On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac's part of a movement called the Beat Writers, and they called themselves that because they felt that society had beat them down, tried to force them into a stereotypical mold that they didn't want to be in. Kerouac and many of his friends who also write, they engage in rowdy behavior. He talks about it in his book, which is really kind of semi-autobiography, where he and his friends go on this cross-country trip. They do things like drink, smoke, have sex. They talk about issues that adults are not comfortable with kids reading. So Kerouac's kind of like an enemy of the people. Something that's overlooked quite frequently in terms of literature is also Alfred Kinsey's books about sex. The sexual behavior in males and females. They often just refer to them as the Kinsey Reports. And he studied the sexuality of human being, and he does something that upsets what mainstream America thought. He suggested that human sexuality is not something that is binary, like you're either homosexual or heterosexual. He suggested there was a spectrum, that people were from 1 to 6. 1 being a heterosexual and 6 being a homosexual with no attractions to anybody else, but 2 through 5, you could be somewhere in the middle. And this really upsets a lot of Americans because he said the people that he studied, very few of these individuals were really ones or sixes. They always tended to fall somewhere between. You can imagine the type of effect that would have on people. We'll talk about some more literature in our next video and tell you more about American pop culture.